girl. Oh, thank you for the kiss. Thank you for the kisses. Sweet baby. Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel Bandy's Books, and today we're here for a December reading wrap up. Now with the new year in full swing, I just wanted to sneak in here really quick and do a end of the month wrap up for December. I read a lot of great books in December and I want to make sure I review them all. And then tomorrow I will be back with the wrap up for the entirety of 2023, or at least the start of the wrap up. It's going to be like the statistics and facts and stuff like that. I read 24 books in December, so we've got a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and just dive right in. So with those 24 books, I read 7,805 pages in the month of December. That breaks down to 325 pages per book. So that's a little tiny bit lower than my usual average, but not by much. My top 5 genres this month were thrillers, historical fiction, mystery, crime, and sci-fi. Interesting because I don't think I've ever seen crime as one of my top genres for a month. And then in terms of fiction to nonfiction, I only managed to read 4% nonfiction this month. That was one single book. This is something that I'm going to be working on in 2024 for sure, is incorporating a bit more nonfiction into my reading. My shortest read of the month was Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shannon McGuire, and that had about 160 pages. My longest read of the month was Wolfsong by TJ Klune, and it came in at about 528 pages. So now let's go ahead and jump into how I rated the various books that I've read. I just wanted to remind you as well that for me, 5 stars is like an A. It is perfect. It doesn't need further corrections. A 4-star is like a B, so it passed the assignment, it was solid, it was good. There might be some room for improvement, but it's not significant. A 3-star for me is like a C, it's satisfactory. It passed the class, but barely. There's definitely some work and some room for improvement. And a 2-star is like a D. So at that point, it would be a fail for me. I would not recommend that book. So today we're gonna start with our 2-star reads, and I have 3 of them. First up, I have The Patron Saint of Pregnant Girls by Ursula Hegi. So this was a bit of a surprise for me. This sounded really interesting, and a lot of people were saying very good things about this particular author. It was my first time ever reading a book by them, and it just didn't work for me. So this book is set in Germany in the late 1800s. There's a circus, and then there's like a tidal wave, and there's pregnant women. It's just really confusing and somehow super boring at the same time. This book moved at a snail's pace. It's only like 200 and something pages, and it felt so long. It's 274 pages, and I felt like I was reading like an 800-page book. It just dragged slow as molasses. Then I had The Diver's Game by Jessie Ball. I picked this up because this is a dystopian fic. It has the world split between the quads and the pats. The pats are the superior group, and they can kill quads whenever they want. The quads have very little human rights. This started out really interesting. I love a good dystopian fic. I also really enjoy literary fiction, which this has a very literary element to it. But this somehow went completely off the rails in the second half of the book. Started out kind of figuring out the world and how it was structured and what this conflict was between these two groups. And then there was a parade and a little girl who's going to be sacrificed and like a whole bunch of stuff that just was really irrelevant to the actual plot of the book. I still am not really sure what happened to the world to make it be divided the way that it is, or what this girl in this parade had to do with the dystopian element. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I have since found out that Jessie Ball is actually a pretty well-known author, but his writing is very sparse. He likes to be very austere and not add a lot of detail, so that explains a lot about this book. If that's his specific style, then that's cool. I think it's not necessarily for me. And the last of my 2-star reads was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. I am kind of surprised but not surprised that this is here. So I haven't had the best luck with Alex Michaelides. I have read his 2 previous books, The Silent Patient and The Maidens. The Silent Patient for me was so-so. I figured out the twist very early on and didn't really find it that surprising. The Maidens I didn't find very good. I got through it. It was okay-ish. But this is like far worse than those 2, in my opinion. This book is all over the place. I know that I tend to be critical of thrillers for going off the rails at the end in order to try to keep things surprising, and that's exactly what this did, except in a much larger and more extreme scale. The first little bit of the story was interesting, and then it just started getting all over the place. I never felt invested in the characters. I kind of saw what was coming, but then at the same time, he added all these crazy twists to try to make it shocking. This definitely was not his best work. Now we're gonna move into the 3-star books. I have 5 books that are in the 3-star category this month. First up is The House of Doors by Twan. This is a book that I am really bummed to put in the 3-star category. This was a book that showed up on the Booker long list, a book that sounded really interesting to me. It's set in a cool place. It's got some really important themes, but it was just really boring. The writing was lovely. There's nothing wrong with it from a technical aspect, but from a enjoyment aspect, it just was really slow paced to the point of being boring. Then I have 13 Reasons Why by J. Asher. This is a book that blew up a while back, got turned into a Netflix TV show, was all over the place, and then just kind of quietly disappeared. And I kind of understand why now. The concept is interesting. We have a young woman who takes her own life and then leaves a mysterious package to different people within her social circle. And it's tapes of her explaining how all of these different people have wronged her. And she leaves like a map of all these locations that they should go to as they listen to the tapes. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt in a sick, twisted way. We see the book through the eyes of a person who was involved in her life, but didn't necessarily play like a massive integral part. So the concept for this book is kind of interesting, but I feel a little bit icky about what I perceive to be some of the messaging in this book. And it's that, you know, your suicide is like the ultimate revenge against your bullies. I don't love that connotation, and I kind of worry about a younger audience reading this and consuming this because, you know, the last thing I feel like you want is to glorify or like romanticize a tragic event. I don't want to say that this quite glorifies or romanticizes it, but it kind of gives you the feeling like the character gets her final revenge on all these bullies and mean people that took advantage of her by doing this. She's like shamed them publicly in the whole town. I don't know, like I said, I feel like there's some weird messaging in this. Then I had Curfew by Jayne Cowie. This is a dystopian fic. I love dystopian fic, so I was actually really excited about it. And this one's kind of unique. So this is a world where women are tired of men assaulting them, murdering them, abusing them. And so women take charge and they create a curfew for men. So men have to wear like ankle trackers, and they're not allowed out of the house at certain hours. They have to be inside at nighttime. They're only allowed to have certain jobs. Men and women can only live together if they've gone through counseling and like gotten approved to have a cohabitation license. There's a whole bunch of rules, and it's a pretty interesting societal structure. Where this fell apart a little bit for me is that there wasn't enough history in this book to justify the way the world is designed. Like, how did the women overthrow the men and put the men into this submissive position? How did they create this ankle monitoring system? We have a character who's been in prison for breaking curfew, but we don't really get like a ton of information around that. And then there's a murder mystery going on. There's a police officer that's investigating the murder mystery. There's like government officials that are trying to cover up, you know, the facts about this particular case because they don't want a scandal. It's just, there's a lot going on. And I think the point of this book is that no matter how much women try to prevent men taking advantage of women, they'll always find a way. I thought that the concept was good, but I think the execution needed a decent amount of work. So then I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. This was another book that I was hoping was going to be better than it actually was. This is literary fiction, and it was listed as an NPR Best Book of the Year and named Year's Best in Literary Fiction by the Notable Books Council. It was turned into a Netflix film, and I remember hearing quite a bit about it. For me, this was kind of predictable. I didn't actually know that much about the book going into it, so it wasn't like, oh, I've just like picked up so much info about it that I knew, you know, what was going on. I felt like maybe a third into the book, I could kind of figure out where this was going. We have a couple in a car. They're driving home from the boyfriend's house, and things start to become very weird very fast. This was okay. I think it could have been better. Maybe it's just because I've been reading so much really good literary fiction lately. This one just felt a little flat. Then I had The Curse of Penryth Hall by Jess Armstrong. This was a book that I had an ARC for. This was enjoyable. This was a high-end 3-star. It was kind of a fantasy, a mystery. We have a woman who has run away from a town. She's living with this elderly man, and he sends her back to the town she came from to run an errand for him. And there she becomes invested and entangled with a mystery, a murder mystery. And there is a gentleman with some kind of magical realism type powers, and they have an instant connection and they keep running into each other. So I think that the plot was fun for this book. It wasn't anything super serious. It wasn't really deep into the fantasy, and the mystery elements were kind of light. So, you know, we have a murder mystery going on, but it's not really gruesome or graphic. It's just, you know, a light, enjoyable fantasy mystery. It was a bit more romance heavy than I was expecting, but it wasn't like something that was off-putting to me. Overall, if you like fantasy, if you like mystery, you know, you may enjoy this one, but just go into it expecting nothing super serious. Now we're gonna jump into our 4-star reads. The first that I have is Under the Java Moon by Heather B. Moore. This is a World War II historical fiction, and it's set in Indonesia, and it is timed right as the Japanese invade Indonesia. Prior to the Japanese invasion in World War II, Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch. So our book takes place centered on a Dutch family living in Indonesia. And then the Japanese come in and the Indonesians start a revolution against the Dutch. This family is then thrown into a prisoner of war camp with all the other Dutch people, except for the husband, who is away on a military mission, and he has quite the adventure trying to get home. I really enjoyed this book in that it was World War II, but it was a part of World War II that gets very little attention. I don't think I've ever read a book set in Indonesia in World War II, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And so I really appreciated that element of it. When we do see books about the Japanese part of World War II and their expansion through Asia, we often see books that are set in Korea or in China, but they expanded through so many different countries, and Indonesia was one of them. After that, I have Wolfsong by TJ Klune. I had an audio ARC of this book. It's being re-released right now, so I think this book was published quite a while back, but Tor Books has picked it up. They're redesigning the covers and they're doing audiobooks for it. So I got an ARC of the audiobook. I was very excited because I really love TJ Klune's writing. This is essentially a werewolf romance, and I was a little bit caught off guard by that. I have seen like shifter romances and stuff like that pop up on Facebook, like, here, get this app to read, you know, shifter romances. And so like, I know that that's a popular thing, but I guess I was a little surprised to see that from TJ Klune for some reason. But once I got over like the surprise at what I was reading, it was actually a really enjoyable book. We have a gentleman named Ox who is kind of like an outcast in the town that he lives in. He's there with his mom. His dad took off when he was young. He's often bullied because his dad is gone. And then a family moves in next door, and Ox is inextricably drawn to this family, and in particular their youngest child. He forms a really tight bond with them, and then he finds out some things that he never imagined. I really loved Ox as a character in particular. I found him really fascinating and really well done. He's very endearing, and the story itself was very interesting. The plot was a little wild at points, but I thought it was a pretty enjoyable read. It's definitely not House on the Cerulean Sea, but it also wasn't the worst TJ Klune book that I've ever read. I think that if you like his style of writing, if you like werewolf, if you like romance, if you like fantasy, you may enjoy this book. Then I read The City and the City by China Mieville. This was my first time reading a book by this author, but I have heard a ton about how they are a fantastic fantasy writer. I figured that this was a pretty good place for me to dip my toes in, as it is a standalone. So we have kind of a fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian sort of a setting where we have a city. I think it's supposed to be like an Eastern European city, and a murder is committed. We have a person investigating this murder, and they have to cross borders into almost another reality. Like, it's described as two different cities and that they share a border to some degree. But if you exist in this city, like, you're not allowed to be seen in this other city. And there's like psychic planes and a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's really hard to explain, but I really enjoyed this one. It was definitely very different than I was expecting. And I don't know if I could say that I've read anything quite like it before. I liked it enough that I will probably pick up other books by this author in the future. Then I have The President's Wife by Tracey Anderson Wood. This is a World War I historical fiction that features Woodrow Wilson's second wife. Woodrow Wilson loses his first wife, and he's grieving, and he is introduced to this woman by some mutual friends, and the two of them hit it off really well. Woodrow Wilson turns into a massive flirt, woos her, and this is really all about their process of getting to know each other and then eventually getting married. And it's told from the woman's perspective, and I thought that was an interesting choice. I don't know a ton about Woodrow Wilson, and I think that historically he's kind of an interesting president, and he was also president at a very complex time in history. The book does touch on that a bit. This isn't necessarily like the deepest historical fiction, but I did find it very interesting. Then I have Gaslight by Femi Kayode. This is a Nigerian thriller, and I really enjoyed this. It was good fun. We have a church where the wife of the head bishop has gone missing. The bishop has been arrested under the suspicion of her murder, and that's caused quite a scandal in the church. And then we have this family who's just moved back from the United States to Nigeria, and the husband happens to be a criminal investigator. And so he's called in to confirm that the bishop is innocent and squash this scandal, maybe find the bishop's wife. I thought that this was really well written. It was fast-paced, it was funny, it was social critique. I really enjoyed this. I will say that this is the second book in a series. However, I do actually think that you could read Gaslight as a standalone and still really enjoy it. I don't think that there was anything that I felt you would have missed for not having read the first book. Although, I mean, you should read the first book, you know, you probably like that one too. But yeah, this was just really enjoyable. If you enjoy thrillers, you like Nigerian literature, you like fast-paced, high octane, good mystery, really likable, interesting characters, I think that you will likely enjoy this book. Then I have Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. So I have read Razorblade Tears and All the Sinners Bleed, and really enjoyed both of those books. So I've read Razorblade Tears and All the Sinners Bleed, and I really enjoyed both of those books. I've been kind of hesitant to get into Blacktop Wasteland just because it is about a person who is kind of like on the straight and narrow, but being pulled by circumstance back into his old shady ways as a getaway driver for bank robbers. And I don't know, for me that just kind of feels a little like maybe played out. Like I've seen that story a lot, and it never ends well. And I don't know, I wasn't feeling that hot going into this. I did like this. I did think it was well written. S.A. Cosby is a super talented author. In fact, I would dare to say that he's probably one of my favorite modern authors. But this one just, for me, wasn't quite as good as his other two books. All the Sinners Bleed and Razorblade Tears in particular are like really good. And this one was good, but I feel like you can tell that this was an earlier work of his. Not to say that you shouldn't read it, but just, you know, temper your expectations a bit. Then I had Mr. Magic by Keirsten White. I wasn't sure what to expect going into this one. The cover of this looks like it's going to be kind of an acid trip sort of a book, but then when you delve into it, it's kind of a fantasy horror sort of a book. I found this concept really interesting. I actually was super invested in trying to, you know, discover what this mystery was, what was happening to our main characters. We basically have a group of people who have gotten together that grew up together and had some very formative experiences together, but nobody remembers the things that they're referencing. It's kind of like that GIF or Jiffy thing where like everybody remembers it being Jiffy, but it's actually GIF. They remember things, but other people say those things didn't actually happen. So I liked that idea of exploring that kind of a topic, and I found myself really compelled, and I actually went through this really fast. I think the only reason that I didn't rate this higher was because I feel like the ending was very magic instead of explanation of the magic. Like, I don't necessarily mind like a magical ending, but I do want to understand how the magical ending worked. Like, you can't just go, oh, I don't know how to explain it, so magic. And that's kind of the way the ending felt to me. Then I had The Wildest Son by Asha Lemmie. And this was a book I was a little nervous about. I read 50 Words for Rain earlier this year. And for me, that book bordered on trauma porn. It was just like one bad thing after another happening to the main character. The whole book was literally just misery, 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 misery. This one didn't look like it was going to be that miserable, but the summary of it made it seem like it possibly could be. We have a young woman who grew up in Paris with a single mother and was told that her father was a famous author. So she sets off across the world, heads to Brooklyn, then she heads to Cuba, and then over to Miami in search of this famous father of hers. She's also hoping to become an author. So not only does she want validation as a daughter, but she wants validation by her author father as a writer as well. I really liked the first maybe 70% of this book. I thought that our main character's story of how she got to the United States and then how she gets to Cuba was really interesting. I actually also really enjoyed the parts where she was in Cuba. We even get a little brief look at Cuba as the revolution is starting and Fidel Castro is attempting to take power. But I didn't love the way that this ended. I felt like the last bit of the book was very rushed and we didn't get a lot of good explanation of things. It was kind of just like, oh, all these loose threads, tie them together really quick. Here's a neat bow, okay, done. It was interesting because, like I said, the first book verged on trauma porn for me. And then this one, it feels like it was just kind of made to end really neat and tidy. Then I had Shadow Speaker by Nnedi Okorafor. This is another series that is being re-released. I think that she previously had written it and now it's being, updated by the publisher. I love Okorafor's writing. I've read Kayode and Noor, and I really appreciate her Afrofuturistic concepts. I love that she does like fantasy and sci-fi set in Northern Africa. It's really interesting and really unique. This one was enjoyable. I think if you have enjoyed Okorafor's writing in the past, you will likely enjoy this duology as well. Then I had Billie Starr's Book of Saris by Deborah E. Kennedy. This is an interesting book. It is kind of a family drama. So we have Jenny, who's kind of the queen of making bad decisions, and she lives with her daughter, Billie Starr, who is like still a child. There's no man in the picture at this time, and Jenny is trying to like keep things together, but she's not doing the greatest at it. Bills are past due. Her mom is a mess and interfering in her life. Her kid is starting to recognize that there are problems. School is putting pressure on her. There's just a lot going on. And in desperation, Jenny accepts a very strange proposal. Some strangers in black suits come up to her at some point and essentially offer her a bunch of money to sleep with a political candidate and then use it to blackmail him. She goes ahead and does it, and things don't quite turn out the way that she plans. The candidate ends up really liking her and offering her a job, and that seems like it might be the way out of her struggles. This is kind of a family drama, a little bit of a mystery element. I really enjoyed the majority of this book. I thought the writing was decent. I appreciated all the different characters. There were parts that were very visceral and cringy, but overall, not cringy in bad writing, but cringy just for what the character is doing in the story. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I think the only reason that this didn't rate a little bit higher was because for me, the ending wasn't ideal. I kind of see where the author was going with the ending, but I feel like it was plot twist just to make things more interesting than they already were. And I felt like, honestly, there was enough going on in this book without having to do that plot twist thing. I think if she had found a more simplistic ending, it might have actually suited the book a little better. Then I read Lilith by Nikki Marmory. This is a feminist retelling of the women in the biblical stories, and it is centered around Lilith. She is the woman in the Garden of Eden before Eve, and then she is chased away when she refuses to submit to Adam, and then Eve follows in her place and is made to be more submissive. We then see Lilith go on a journey across the lands to restore balance to the world order, and this was really interesting. I wasn't sure going into this how I would feel about it, but I actually really liked what the author did. I thought that it was an interesting story. There was a lot of action and adventure. There were definitely some very feminist themes in here, but I didn't feel like it was done in a disrespectful way. I think it was just looking at the way female characters in the Bible can often be reinterpreted. Then I had Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shannon McGuire. This is the next installment in the Wayward Children series. This wasn't my favorite book in the series, but also not my least favorite book in the series either. I think if you've liked the previous installments, you'll likely enjoy this one as well. Then I had Dangerous Women by Mark DeCastreek. This is a crime mystery, and this is book 2 in a series. I really enjoy this particular series because we have this character named Ethel, who is a badass older woman. She's an ex-FBI agent. She is connected to all sorts of people across, different investigative branches. And she is a phenomenon at sleuthing out crimes. We have a fairly standard murder mystery here. It's not necessarily going to do the most mind-blowing things, but Ethel is the reason that you come to read this book, and she's the reason that you stay with this series too. Then I read Fair Rosaline by Natasha Solomons, and this was a interesting book for me. It is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, which I'm not super into Shakespeare. I've read some of his books, I've seen some of his plays, but it's not my bread and butter. I don't reread him and oh my gosh, this is so revolutionary for me. So I wasn't sure how I was gonna like this book, and I actually ended up really enjoying it. We see the book from Rosaline's perspective, and it's interesting because in this particular story, Romeo is kind of a cad. He's a player, he's, a ladies' man, but in the sleaziest ways. And Rosaline can see it, and she's trying to protect the other ladies in the kingdom from this scenario that she found herself in. And it adds a really interesting perspective to the story when you view Romeo that way. It changes so much. I had a really good time with this read, and I think that if you like Romeo and Juliet, you like Shakespeare, you like retellings of classics, you may enjoy this one. it's good fun. And now into my 5-star reads. I had 2 of them this month, and that's kind of sad because that's, I think, the lowest number of 5-star reads that I've had in any month this year. First up, I had The Porcelain Maker by Sarah Freeby. This is a World War II historical fiction, and although I have been experiencing a bit of World War II historical fiction fatigue, I did end up with an ARC of this book, and so I decided to read it, and I'm glad I did. This is about 2 people that fall in love right at the start of World War II, and then they are separated as one of them is deported to the concentration camps and the other ends up pregnant and alone, terrified, and marries a German officer. But not even a concentration camp can keep them apart. The 2 of them love each other so fiercely. There are also themes of art and sculpture and porcelain crafting within this book that I thought were really interesting. This was a little bit unlike anything that I've read in terms of historical fiction for WW2 previously. The reason that I rated this so highly is because this is an emotional gut punch of a book. This does not shelter you from any of the terrible things that happen, any of the terrible decisions that people have to try to make to survive. It talks about the value of art and like literally how people pay with blood for art. It left me thinking about a lot after I finished reading it, and I feel like if I'm still thinking about a book a couple days later, that usually means that it was a pretty good read. My second 5-star read was Trail of the Lost by Andrea Langford. This book is about 3 different cases of people going missing along the Pacific Crest Trail, and search and rescue teams going out and trying to find these people, and then internet communities and sleuths trying to help families find clues to what happened to their disappeared loved ones. Andrea Langford worked for a long time with national parks doing search and rescue, and so she is an extremely experienced search and rescue person. In the time period of this book, she is no longer working in search and rescue in an official capacity, but she is called in to consult on a couple of cases, and this is her perspective. This book talks a lot about how hikers go missing, why it's so difficult to find missing hikers in vast wilderness, what families will try to do to find their, missing loved ones, how the internet community can really help in terms of searching, the perils and risks of sending in search and rescue crews, all sorts of different things. It was really fascinating for me as somebody who is a hiker and as somebody who's also participated in a handful of search and rescues for missing hikers. I thought that this had a lot of really cool and interesting information, and it just really made me feel a lot of awe and respect for the volunteers that get out there searching for people's loved ones, and for the search and rescue teams that work professionally going into extremely difficult environments to try to find, injured hikers or even the remains of dead hikers. It was a pretty interesting book for me. I think this book would be interesting for most people, but particularly if you're really into outdoors, adventures, hiking, things like that. So at the end of this month, my average rating was 3.68. I'm a little bummed about that. That's a little lower than usual. Usually I'm around like 3.85 to 3.93. But I didn't have that many 5-star reads this month, so it didn't bring the rating up. I also had a little bit more 2 stars than usual. My favorite book of the month was The Trail of the Lost. Like I said, I found this really interesting and I devoured it. My least favorite book of the month was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. This just did not do it for me. There might be somebody that likes this book, but even based on the reviews that I was looking at online, it seems like out of his 3 books, this is definitely the lowest rated one so far. So that is the end of my December wrap up. I hope that you have found this interesting. Maybe you found some books that you're interested in adding to your TBR. If you did, hit the thumbs up, comment down below. Let me know, have you read any of the books that I mentioned? What did you think of them? Were there any that sounded interesting to you that you think you might read in the future? And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell, so that you never miss a video, and that way we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.